Thank you. Once again, welcome to the online roundtable, the pivot role of the V4 in the current process of the EU enlargement panel. I will be short in my introduction, and I will introduce Professor Kolozova, who will open the panel. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. The concept is, as you know from the invitation itself, is that everybody who attends in a way actively participates in this conversation. That's why we had a list of selected invitees, and whomever I invited via the Facebook event, like Tony, for example, was invited for a reason, so that we have a good quality discussion here. Just technical explanation for the occasion of this roundtable.
My robíme na tých prekladoch.
Sir, Mr. Ambassador, Markus Henrik, Mr. Ambassador, your mic is on.
Dobre. Robí.
Riste? Okay. Okay, so this is essentially a follow-up from a roundtable we had in Bratislava in November. We held in Bratislava in November. Our host was Professor Juraj Marusiak from the Slovak Academy of Sciences, where we discussed the questions of EU integration, the rising Euroscepticism essentially across the board of EU and European Economic Area nation states, but also increasingly so, interestingly so, in this region as well. And the question was how to tackle the problem. I may say that we will hopefully hear from Jacques Rupnik from Sciences Po in Paris, who is also active at the Jacques Delors Institute in France, but in Paris as well. But if he doesn't, I will maybe use his latest input. We had an exchange of emails in this past days as a provocation for further conversation. He commented in his latest email that until recently, the Visegrad 4 may have been perceived as the bulwark of EU integration, that for some reason, in spite of them being perceived as Eurosceptics, maybe because of the whole Ukraine crisis context, but I think the case was like that even before that. This region was seemed to be more very much committed to EU to the process of EU integration, and especially to the integration of Western Balkans. Jacques shared with me an article where where it is discussed about the split between the Czech Republic and Poland, essentially around Ukraine, and Hungary and Slovakia now being more skeptical about EU policy and this unconditional support for Ukraine around it. But I still could find a bunch of articles, including Hungarian, which demonstrates strong conviction, strong commitment to the integration of Western Balkans. It seems even more so than Ukraine or Moldova. So it will be interesting to discuss those details, and in that sense we would be picking I'm just using this exchange as a provocation to pick up on the questions that we all raised in Bratislava already. But first I want to conclude and open the discussion for everybody else with the following remarks. they are related to the recommendations I give at the end of the paper. You know, the papers we all produced for our Visegrad volume and for identities. I will not repeat the recommendations, but I will revisit the key premises. There, I tried to challenge this widespread preconception here in the country, at least in North Macedonia. I don't know about the region, but my guess is that the situation may be similar to the region, which gives rise to Euroscepticism. This constant repetition, they don't really want us in. It's like the song, a refrain that never stops in our civil society expert circles around EU integration. It's this even if it's not this wording, that's the undertone or the overtone. That's the point. They don't really want us in. They don't really want the Balkans in. They're just pretending they want us in, which according to me, because it's based on emotions, vague perceptions, a folkish sense of understanding of policies, like knee-jerk reaction to, what based on what one has been as a Balkanite to the EU for decades, that must be still the case. No, there is such thing as policies, and there are changes in policies. So if you look at the resolution from November 2022 last year, so of the European Parliament, there is a clear injunction there sent to the EU Council that the entire Western Balkans, not the candidates, Western Balkans, should be in the Union by 2030. Whether it's doable, I don't know, but it shows genuine commitment, and this is a commitment coming from the European Parliament. Then one very important concept that I focus on in the paper, and I will revisit in order to make or push further my point, is the geopolitical redefinition of Europe and the European Commission. You remember the famous quote from the president of the European Commission about it becoming a geopolitical commission, a speech she gave in 2019. So it was prior to Ukraine, prior to COVID. This concept entails a different understanding of geopolitics, an understanding of geopolitics that is so closely linked with the processes of building, like cyber e-society, digital societies, so therefore digital democracies, digital economic areas, etc., etc. So very interestingly, this geopolitics is an aspect of everything that has to do with digitalization. Digitalization is directly linked with economic, global, planetary, as she would use the term, planetary economic competition. So China and the others. So this is a competition taking place in the digital marketplace. Let's put it that way. But it's still somehow premised on a certain geopolitics, geolocation. So it's a very interesting hybrid of, the old style of political reasoning where territory, like physical territory and circumscribing it is as important as digitalization or taking society and politics in the realm of literally the cloud, as in internet terms. So to wrap up, this is a very general point I'm making here, but it points to the following. Europe is really redefining itself in terms of geopolitics. This geo politics is in no contradiction with the processes of digitalization. Quite to the contrary, it serves them. And therefore, when we say there is a geopolitical impetus to integrate Western Balkans, or when I say that in these studies we all produced, in the volume of these studies we will produce, I never refer only to the war in Ukraine and the possibilities of war and destabilization in that sense. I'm also referring to this overall understanding of geopolitics that has redefined Europe. And if you remember, when we received the so-called French proposal and the lifting of the veto, the motto of the French presidency back then was pour une Europe géopolitique, if you no, politique, if you remember, but rendering it political is rendering it geopolitical. I will wrap up now with a very short quote from Jutta Urpilainen of the mission of the Director General of International Partnership, DG INTPA. She says the following: the journey of the new Geopolitical Commission started in December 2019. We want Europe to be stronger in the world. President von der Leyen, or Leyen, however we pronounce it, entrusted me with the role of the Commissioner of International Partnerships in my mission letter, and asked me to ensure that European model of development evolves in line with new global realities. This means working hand in hand with partners, setting agendas, taking initiatives, effective implementation of our actions, and promoting and protecting human rights, democracy, and the rule of law as the very foundational of this international cooperation. To further paraphrase, enlargement and neighborship collaboration is also understood based on the premises of these principles I just cited. So this was my somewhat lengthy intro. I will stop now and give the floor to the ambassador, and then Risti, you just give the floor to the keynote speakers as they're stated in the program, and then to everybody else.
Thank you very much, Katarina, and good morning to everyone. I apologize for coming in at this point. Indeed, I will not be able to stay for the entire discussion, but thank you for the opportunity to join you. I should say from the start, my plan is to focus very much on some of the questions that you have put in the documentation prepared for this meeting. Is Europe playing a more geopolitical role, taking a geopolitical approach rather than a technocratic approach to the enlargement process? How strongly is the Union truly committed to the process? Is 2030 truly a deadline for the full integration of the Western Balkans, in line with the recommendation from the resolution from the European Parliament? And can the Western Balkans opt out from the integration process, and if so, at what cost? I'm not going to focus so much on the issue of the Visegrad 4 and the contribution that they've made, partly because of my position as EU ambassador, but also because I see in the number of guests, there are a number of individuals, including my ambassador colleagues here, who are more than competent and more competent than I to talk on the role that the Visegrad 4 has brought and can bring to the enlargement process in the future. I've been here in North Macedonia since 2020, so I will be perhaps giving it a little bit of a Macedonian slant, but I hope that some of the comments I make are felt to be applicable throughout the Western Balkans and to the enlargement processes more generally. First of all, and then touching on the whole question of the geopolitical approach as opposed to a more technocratic approach. And I must say, I agree with much of what Katarina, if not all of what Katarina has said to date. I think for quite some time, even before the war in Ukraine, it has been clear that the assessment of the interest that the European Union has in seeing enlargement, including to the Western Balkans, bear fruit, has increased, and it's become an increasingly, I think, a geopolitical assessment of values, not just the values and the interests of on terms of economy and in terms of democracy, both of which, of course, are very important and very central to the whole project, but also increasingly the advantages and benefits that can be drawn from enlargement on the basis of security and stability, and the risks that are inherent in not advancing in this area. And I think increasingly we see it as an interest-based discussion, sometimes in the quite emotive discussions that you see in the public space here. It's expressed as if somehow the European Union is acting out of its own emotion, or its kindness or generosity or lack of generosity. It's not that, as you know, we act on the basis of interest. And I think you see an increasing definition of interest to expand to include security and stability, notably from the French President Macron, but of course not only him, you see it in the repeated declarations of the leaders. This, of course, has become much more intensive following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and you've seen that this now, and not least with the decision last December vis-à-vis Ukraine and Moldova, you see now it's very much framed in a very geopolitical way, and it's seen as being very much in the security and stability interests of the European Union, as well as the other elements which have always been important. I think the seriousness with which you see the engagement of the EU can be also measured by the increasing discussions that take place with partners in the area of security and defense. Still, of course, not comparable to NATO, but nonetheless, I think much more substantial. Only last week, I was celebrating here with the Minister of Defense our equipping of the army here through the European peace facility. Again, I think a sign of a different kind of defense engagement, without, of course, talking about borders, the fight against extremism, cyber, and all of the other areas which touch on security and stability. And of course, in the past years, there have also been a number of initiatives which I think have shown the extent to which the European Union sees the Western Balkans as key partners, and the enlargement process is central to our own development. The most recent initiative, the Growth Plan, which is still being discussed with member states, so I think it's one of the most concrete and quite radical proposals that have been on the table for a very long time, in the sense that it's talking about bringing forward the benefits, or some of the benefits of enlargement through access to parts of the European single market in advance of accession itself, combining that with very substantial investments in the figure being discussed with member states at the moment of 6 billion euros, mixture of loans and grants, combined with regional integration on the basis of EU standards, and of course, critical to all of this, really advancing on reform. But the basic logic here of this reform, this growth plan, is to see economic and social integration really moving forward within the region, and trying to reverse a trend where poor level of growth risks a situation whereby the countries of the region actually fall further behind in terms of economic and social cohesion with the European Union. And I think this is something that's really worth following, and has the potential to really transform the situation. Of course, it will depend upon the engagement from all to see if this really is a success. I don't underestimate the challenges that exist. We all know that the road on enlargement has not been smooth. There have been periods of relative stagnation, and I think the emotions that Katarina was talking about, that sense of you don't want us, we're not wanted, comes from the experience of what they feel, what local population, certainly here in North Macedonia, feels as rejection or a failure to deliver on promises of the past. And here I'm talking, of course, about the Prespa agreement and the promise to open accession negotiations with the name change, which was delayed until only July 2022. And I don't underestimate the extent of the challenges which will come with the elections in June and beyond that. But I think what is so important, the commitment that was made in December this year, building on previous commitments, has set a challenge for the EU itself. Of course, the issue of internal reform of the European Union is an issue which is very live. There is a fear here in North Macedonia, and no doubt in other Western Balkan countries, that this is a pretext not to move forward. But in my view, that is absolutely not the case. If the EU member states are not talking about reform, then they're not talking seriously about enlargement. Of course, we have to be realistic about what can be achieved through treaty change, what can be achieved without treaty change. But all of these discussions need to go forward in parallel with the enlargement itself. Is 2030 a real deadline? I mean, of course, this is a resolution from the European Parliament. It's not the position of the EU that the Western Balkans must be integrated by 2030. And you will have seen when the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, floated this idea, there were various reactions from member states. But I think this whole discussion about the 2030 deadline is really a discussion about the speed of reforms. And as we always say, that in order to join the European Union, the speed and the progress that the countries make will depend primarily on the speed of the reforms that are implemented domestically within the countries that are applying to join. Looking at North Macedonia, the government is committed to a deadline of 2030. I have to say this is very ambitious. It would need a lot of steps to be taken to achieve that. First and foremost, it would need the different political parties to come together and to put aside the partisan or the differences that they have on many, many issues, and say that while we disagree on so many issues, we are prepared to make this the primary focus of the next period in terms of reforms, and we will work together to ensure that reforms are implemented. We're certainly not seeing this at the moment. When we look at the experience of other countries, such as, let's say, the most recent member state to join, Croatia, it managed in a relatively short period of time to put aside some of the party political differences, even though there were very substantial ideological differences between government and opposition in those days, and focus on implementing reforms. And so we would really need to see a very, very active process of reforms. Again, I think the Reform and Growth Plan is offering an opportunity here to advance and to speed up the process. But again, it requires political will from across the political divide. That is in North Macedonia, and the same applies in the other countries of the Western Balkans. But I think the key element here remains reform, and the speed of reform will determine the date on which the country can join. I don't think anyone is going to be concerned whether it's 2030 or 2031 or 32. What needs to be seen is that there is substantial progress by the countries concerned, and that this progress is recognized on the EU side, and that there is a sense of really moving forward. Can the Western Balkans opt out of the integration process? Well, of course, yes, they are, after all, sovereign, but it's very hard to see what alternative policy or politics could be put in place. When you look, let's take North Macedonia again, when you look at the enormous economic weight that the European Union plays within the country in terms of exports and imports, in terms of foreign direct investment, it is way, way ahead of any other player. When you look at the geography of the Western Balkans, and as we always say, the Western Balkans is actually not outside the European Union, but actually already geographically within the European Union, being surrounded by EU member states, it's very hard to see how that geography is going to change or be overcome, even with all the advantages of digitalization. And again, it's hard to see, if you take a country such as North Macedonia, with its particular ethnic mix, with its particular diversity, the accession process is a process which helps to create unity within the country and helps to be a motivator for reinforcing the state, reinforcing the unity of the state. We would have concerns if you take that goal away, to what extent the country is able to, or to what extent the country's stability and security will continue to be deepened. Of course, there are other issues as well, more broadly within the region. Serbia and the Belgrade and Pristina dialogue raises questions in the way in which that is integrated to some extent within the enlargement process. If you take away the enlargement process, whether the incentives, again, would remain to move forward. And the same goes for the process of regional integration, which is now very much a central element. We have the common regional market, certainly attempts to try and boost this common regional market process, not least through the growth plan, because as I've said, one of the pillars of the growth plan is to see regional integration based on EU standards. And it has been assessed that that would bring something, if fully achieved, could bring something up to about 10% in growth of GDP. And these benefits and challenges are not going to change. If anything, I think the challenges will increase as we see the increasing need to respond to global challenges, the green transition, Katerina mentioned digitalization, the way in which markets and industrial policy is developed in the light of global events, including in the United States, including in China, and including obviously the area of foreign direct investment. And finally, for a country such as North Macedonia, but I think it's applicable across the region, without the process of accession, without the goal of joining the European Union, there seems to be very little chance of reversing the brain drain. While we have to be realistic, we know very well that joining the European Union will not stop the brain drain or the skills drain from the country overnight. It takes time, but as we've seen in the number of countries which have joined within the last 20 years, that as the economies of those countries arise, as the living standards go up, so you see this process of emigration slowing down and beginning to reverse. And so again, this offers the best prospect. So while theoretically one can imagine the Western Balkans or individual countries opting out from the integration process, it's hard to see how in practice that could happen without huge geopolitical, economic and social costs for the countries themselves. I want finally just to say, I think that it is important, while clearly emphasizing that the interests of the European Union are to see this expansion, we also have to be a little bit modest and recognize that in the past it has not been a smooth path. It has not always been, we have not always lived up or matched the expectations that have been there, but nor have the countries themselves, whose reform efforts have been very weak and remain still very weak. So I think overall that's the general picture. I'm optimistic that we are in a very different world, one in which enlargement will remain at the top of the agenda, whatever the outcome of the elections in the region, whatever the outcome of the elections in the European Union later this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Okay, before I give the floor to Rista to give the floor to the other speakers, I just have one quick question for you. In order for us to move forward with the reforms as per like sort of a guidelines in a way report we have received from the screening process, we basically have the diagnosis and we have certain indications what needs to be done. Some of these changes presuppose I don't know, a more fundamental change in reasoning as to how public policy is built. For example, this country lacks understanding of the fact that the cluster number one, the fundamentals, is something that is injected horizontally in all sectors. Then it seems to me, based on our institute's analysis, prior analysis, of course, and some of the colleagues, that we also lack understanding of intersectoral policy planning. So this presupposes, I think, a process of capacity building, not just of the institutions, of the administration, human resources, but perhaps even of those who monitor the processes, such as the civil society, because I don't see that awareness there either. Very often I see analysis from our think tanks saying the new intersectoral methodology is there simply to trick us and delay the accession process. So my point is, it's not just, that we are not doing the work of reform that we're supposed to be doing. It's just that we do not meet certain preconditions of political culture in order to start doing them properly. You don't need to address this if it is too vast, but in the context of all of this, I will ask you one specific question, which is very concrete, very narrowly specific. But it is of the status of this more fundamental preconditions. The condition for North Macedonia to recognize the Bulgarian and a couple of other minorities by explicitly referencing to them in the constitution of the state is basically the conditionality of our negotiating and reform process. Do you see meeting this conditionality, which should be done by the parliament, of course, the conditionality of recognizing these minorities, including the Bulgarian minority? Do you see these obligations also as sort of a reform that needs to be, do you categorize it as a reform under the rubric of good neighborly relations, I'm assuming, in the negotiating framework? Do you see it as something of that nature? And are you hopeful that we would be able to meet this criterion?
So we're talking quite specifically to North Macedonia here, and I'm sure everyone is familiar with the agreement that was reached in July 2022, which resulted in Bulgaria lifting its veto on the opening of accession negotiations, as a result of which the first phase began, the screening. But in order to move to the next stage, which is opening of the first cluster and the approval of the roadmaps and everything, the country needs to adopt changes to the constitution to include people who self-identify as Bulgarian explicitly within the remit of the constitution. By the way, one can argue that implicitly they're already there. I think that there are two things here. Clearly, this was first of all, a commitment made by North Macedonia to Bulgaria, which was reflected within the EU agreement and which allowed for the lifting of the veto. This was clearly part of a compromise, a political deal, which allowed the country to move forward. So to that extent, I think it's very much a political deal and a compromise. There is, of course, it does also touch on a broader issue, which relates to the question of good neighborly relations. And there is obviously an obligation to ensure the continuation of good neighborly relations. There, I think there are many aspects of good neighborly relations which would be touched in a document which is to be developed by the government here, which is an action plan on minorities. And that, I think, feels very much within the scope of the accession process itself. But of course, the change to the constitution, I think, we have to be honest, is different in nature from the reforms that we are setting out within the accession process, within the roadmaps, etc., which are very practical and very specific and related to the conditions within the country. So in short, I think it's a mixture. It is partly a political deal and partly it touches on the issue of good neighborly relations. Am I optimistic? I mean, I think it's a change that can be done. The way in which it has played out politically here has not been good and has allowed for a great deal of polarization of this issue. We have to see what happens after the elections and whether after the elections the parties are able to come together and say, well, look, this change is actually a relatively minor change in practice, especially when you look at where the negotiations on this issue started and whether it can then be implemented rapidly, allowing to focus on what are the really big issues here, which are indeed, as you mentioned, administrative capacity, administrative culture, fight against corruption, rule of law, which are, the huge overarching issues the country has to face and which we will be very supportive of.
Thank you. Rista, will you take over from this point on?
Yes.
It's Juraj's turn.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Professor Kolozova. Now I will give the floor to Professor Yuri Marusiak. Yuri?
So, Juraj Marusiak,
Yeah,
okay, so this is the first. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation to this roundtable. I think one of the main lessons from our project, from our meeting in Bratislava, was that the EU enlargement is predominantly a political issue. Yeah, so of course EU integration has two dimensions. One dimension is one can say technocratic, but this next one is the dimension is the political dimension. So, however, the European integration has been also largely examined in the existing literature, in the existing research, mostly from the institutional perspective. But as, for example, publications by Frank Schimmelpfennig and Thomas Vincent pointed out, the European integration is accompanied not only by homogenizing, but also by differentiating practices. I think this is also a very important message for the EU candidates, such as North Macedonia, is because even despite of very slow development of EU integration processes in the Southeast European area, these countries are already in many aspects included in the European Union, especially in terms of the free movements of people, in terms of trade security policies, and so on. So, of course, without the presence in EU institutions. This differentiation practices, but also in the integration process, these concerns about national sovereignty and identity plays a significant role. these issues are representing the political and value aspects of integration. And what is also one of the main lessons, especially with the focus on the experience of Visegrad group countries with the arrangement of relations with the neighbors, but also in case of Western Balkan states, these issues of differentiated integration could not be examined only at the level of nation state or on the level of the relations between nation state and EU institutions, as the different images of the world as well as different ideas about the roles and future of European integration and about the role of our own states in the European integration have also an impact on the relations between individual EU member states. Even a few years before, for example, before the war in Ukraine, before the beginning of this recent war in Ukraine, we expected that the level of bilateral relations will gradually decline because they will be moved to Brussels, to the meetings of the representatives and so on. However, now we can see that this importance of bilateralism is increasing. We can see it also on example of development of Visegrad cooperation. So in in this context of EU integration, it can be assumed that it should also include the creation of the favorable atmosphere for the resolution of the conflicts in bilateral relations, in favor of formation of consciousness of mutual solidarity and common interests. However, it can work mostly in long-term perspective, but also in the short-term perspective, as also shows, for example, the experience of Slovak-Hungarian relations. This EU integration also can contribute to the escalation of some conflicts between the future EU member states or even after the EU accession. So what is also very important, it is important the tactics or strategies of the new EU member states they have chosen after the EU accession. Currently, and also Visegrad Group is example of very successful adaptive strategy taken in the pre-accession process and also during the first years after the EU accession. This adaptive strategy means that, of course, the country candidate state must accept the EU rules generally imposed by the EU institutions in the unilateral way. So in these terms, the integration is in many aspects one-way process. However, after the EU accession, the new strategies should be adopted because the role of also Central European countries and in next future the role of Western Balkan states will be changed. So one of the new model is integrationist strategy. It means the use of EU institutions for the promotion of the national interests of the new EU member state. but also there, even within the EU, there could be, and we can see it, for example, on example of Hungary or Poland before parliamentary elections. There were experienced also the opposite strategies. It means the strategy of non-participation in some EU policies, like, for example, in EU migration policy. This approach is called the sovereignist approach, and sometimes even some member states, some countries of Visegrad group, or some political actors in European Union are adopting the so-called de-Europeanization approach. It means they are abandoning some values or patterns of behavior after the EU accession. And also the how much this EU membership could be a challenge for even for the new member states previously described as a successful model of EU integration. It could be seen also on the example of current state of Visegrad cooperation. So instead of the automatic acceptation of EU rules, EU norms, or dominant values within the EU, the Visegrad Group countries started to promote their own interests and their own ideas, and of course, naturally, they came into the conflict with old EU member states. However, in case of global destabilization, as it was caused by the recent war in Ukraine, we can see how much the relations between the neighbors can fall into the crisis. This, I mean now the crisis of Visegrad cooperation. So the previous formulas of legitimacy of Visegrad Group as a successful model of integration, as model of embedded neoliberalism, model of successful post-communist transformation, model of close multilateral cooperation within the EU, they simply doesn't work. It is apparent if one is checking, for example, the website of Visegrad Group. So the intensity of multilateral contacts within the group simply radically dropped down after the February 24, 2022, because of different approach of EU member states to the sanctions towards Russia. Despite of the fact that there are many areas of common interests, many fields where the Visegrad countries could develop the very fruitful cooperation. In fact, this cooperation doesn't work, and this former multilateral formula is gradually going to be replaced by the bilateral formula, by the formula of bilateral cooperation, for example, between Poland and Czech Republic now, or between Slovakia after the recent parliamentary elections, and Hungary. So the political aspects will play the crucial role also in the development of neighbor relations, also after the EU accession. So I think this could be the main message for the Western Balkan countries, that they must not forget on these political aspects of integration. Thank you for attention.
Thank you, Jure, for your insights. Now I give the floor to Professor Spasimir Domaracki. Spasimir.
Thank you very much, Riste. Thank you all for putting together this panel. It's an enormous pleasure that we have one more opportunity to discuss these matters related to the impact of the V4 and its contribution to the region. I thought about my intervention that I will concentrate on the title of our today's roundtable related to the role and impact of the Visegrad 4 when it comes to the context of the EU enlargement. But I have to admit that the preliminary remarks made by both Katerina Kolozova and Ambassador Gear gave me the kind of pushed me towards an additional reflection. So I would like to divide my intervention into two parts. The first one will be very brief because actually Jure mentioned most of the things that I think are quite important when we talk about the role of the region, and probably if there is anything to add, this is just the need for a certain reflection related to the certain paradox of the Western of the Visegrad 4 contributions when it comes to the Western Balkans, because indeed, as it was mentioned, these countries are quite distinct when it comes to their internal justifications for their interest in the Western Balkans. And I think that's something quite important which we should have in mind. The second thing is the changing constellation of possible political alliances. I just went across literally a fresh article from the Czech think tank AMO on the perspective for Czech-Polish closer cooperation in the context of the Visegrad 4, and I have to admit that this is indeed quite a specific aspect when it comes to the role of the Visegrad Group. It is on one hand a very loose formula of cooperation. On the other hand, in itself, this form of cooperation is the potential template that can be applied in the Western Balkans, and I think that's the stock in trade that the V4 tries to apply. On the other hand, if you think that what is missing in this formula is actually the internal V4 coordination of efforts related to the Western Balkans. There is no doubt that for any of those four countries in Central Europe, the EU enlargement is a priority. And what is interesting, it is regardless of what was mentioned already, these profoundly different visions of for the future of the European integration, whether it's going to be this sovereignist or, as we have now in Poland with the return to power of Donald Tusk, of this quest towards returning to the core of the European integration. But in both cases, we don't see genuinely different perspective on this particular aspect related to the EU enlargement. Now, what seems to be quite important is that probably there is a need for the countries of the V4 to also to do some homework when it comes to shared priorities towards the Western Balkans, beyond the fact that they simply agree that the enlargement is necessary. And this is due to the fact that we see quite substantial challenges for the sense of these basic principles that are indispensable for the operation of the European integration. There are a number of arguments about the Hungarian involvement and the particular nature of the current Hungarian-Serbian relations, which are, I would say, on the edge between between, let's say, the European values and the sympathy of authoritarian leaders, which can have a reverse effect for the integration process itself. Needless to say, North Macedonia is also a subject of interest to both these politicians. And in that sense, there is an element that needs to be discussed within the V4. But I will end here on this intervention on the V4 because, as I said, first of all, this is the topic of our panel, and I'm sure that also the others will share their thoughts, so we will have a possibility to return to this reflection. And the second point that I wanted to make, and I will try to be as brief as possible, was sparked by, I would say, certain, from my particular, I would say, scholar perspective, certain essential contradiction within the argumentation that is being raised when we talk about the perspective of enlargement. And that concerns, in particular, the argument about the geopolitical versus values-based perspectives of integration. I have to admit that I have an internal dilemma when I listen the easiness with which these two perspectives are being mentioned, because I think that the geopolitical and the values-based approaches trigger profoundly different behavior, and what is even more, they're in a sense contradictory. Because if we talk about the values-based approach, which is in the core, is in the essence of the EU conditionality, it requires a far-reaching homework on behalf of the candidate states that can convince that they have learned their lessons and are capable of joining in by constituting not a burden but an added value to the integration process. However, the geopolitical approach triggers completely different philosophy. It acknowledges the role of the enlargement in terms of the security interests of the EU member states. And it acknowledges that the potential perspective for enlargement will provide a better geopolitical position for the EU itself. If this is the case, if we take into consideration the security concerns, then the values should be of secondary importance. Because if we consider that there is that we consider the Western Balkans as the soft underbelly with the existing presence and influence of Russian or Chinese influence and any other else who is able to destabilize the region and from there to destabilize the EU itself, then apparently these considerations should drive us towards a logic that the enlargement is a must, as Katja mentioned it in the context of the European Parliament resolution. Now, the paradox for me, or the dilemma that I would be really happy to hear your thoughts, is how to reconcile these two things. Because in the EU has an experience with the geopolitical enlargement. I talked more in detail about that in Bratislava, so I'm going to skip this argument here. But generally, if there is anyone who matches this geopolitical perspective of enlargement, it is the membership of Bulgaria and Romania. And if this is the case, then when you look at their post-membership track record, I would not say that it is very enthusiastic. I would even go further to argue that it kind of had an impact on the quality of the integration process in itself. And we can trace the implications of this experience in the reshaped logic for the EU enlargement policy. So in that sense, well, if it is geopolitics, then apparently the questions which are in the first cluster, the questions of rule of law, the questions of the quality of the political institutions and basic principles should be, in a sense, moved back and replaced by very, I would say, hard geopolitical considerations of why it is necessary that we have united West. And my question is, I would be more than happy to hear if the ambassador here can reflect, because this is something that we can only guess. But when you observe the practical relations between Brussels and Skopje, can you indeed notice, beyond the political rhetoric of the use of geopolitics, that these geopolitical considerations replace or take over the values-based concerns? But that would be just a point that I will be silent and humbly hoping that we will return to in our discussion. On that note, I would like to stop here and looking forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Spasimir. Thank you for your input on the subject. Next, we have Professor Gabor Egri. Gabor?
Thank you very much, and I'm really glad to be here. And I'm also one who tried to tailor the initially imagined contribution to what was said, because it's much better to link with the discussion than talk of my rather sterile issue. I'm a historian and I worked on historical reconciliation within the project, so it's always a bit hard to link with these more concrete political policy issues. But I will try to very briefly sum up two questions that were already tackled, picking up what Katarina said in the introductory remarks about how people very often feel that Europe would never admit the Western Balkans. And this is, I think, a very important issue, because it goes to the historical patterns of self-positioning and self-imagination as regards to Europe, the West, the East, and this is one of the most important. The first points I would try to make is not an essentially Western Balkans or East Central European issue at all. So what I would like to tackle is this kind of the history of and the traditional, the importance of the traditional imaginations of Europe, how much it matters, it could matter regarding the enlargement. The second one is still historical reconciliation, while I argued in the paper I submitted to the project that it's not necessarily the most important for a successful enlargement, especially for starting the negotiations or bringing forward the negotiations with with Macedonia, but it's still, I think, in the Western Balkan context, slightly different than it was in the V4 context, from where I could draw that conclusion. So going first to the issue of this historical self-positioning, it's really important to see that societies used to imagine themselves always in between on the globe. While we easily presume that it's a kind of East Central European specificity to think about being between the East and West, we can find similar tensions or analogous tensions in other societies. Think about how torn Britain is between Europe and the Atlantic or the globe, and how much it is about a kind of irresolvable tension between the desire to belong to a stable space and the permanent experience of contact with other regions. It's practically the same as the East Central European ones. But why the East Central European ones, and this goes to the Western Balkans as well, really matter? Because looking from the West, from the European Union, it's really a kind of form of what social scientists and historians call nested Orientalism, when people always try to position themselves higher than those who are to the east of them, and longing to belong to those societies that they consider to be more superior in economic, social, or cultural terms. And this is, I think, very important, that this is a historical pattern also in all over Central and Eastern Europe, that the idea that somehow belonging to the West gives authenticity and therefore it conveys superiority as opposed to the West, to those societies, and the idea that those societies need to catch up with the West always coexisted, in a sense reflecting this tension of being in between. But, and this is the more historical part, or more concrete historical part of what I would like to say, is that actually the historical the tradition of self-positioning, that is a historical fact in all these societies, even today very much matters how the political elites, intellectuals, and to a certain extent societies imagine the concept of Europe and imagine why their country should belong to Europe. And this goes to what Katerina said. So among the V4, the most visible probably today, because of the Russian aggression against Ukraine and the war, how Poland is now capable to display again its traditional image of being a kind of defensive wall towards the east of the Western civilization. But already there was talk about the V4 position towards the Balkans. And I would argue that Hungary's activism in the Balkans today is a reflection of a kind of historical lesson, and at least for the Prime Minister, the intent to replay, reenact Hungary's medieval position within the space. And this is very important, that Hungary imagines itself in this space as a kind of traditionally the strongest country that has some kind of priority within the region. One can speak of the Czechs' aloofness of the region, the kind of idea of splendid isolation as the most democratic, most developed, most Western country within what we can call, ironically, the mess of Eastern Europe. That was very much the self-legitimacy idea of the first republic. And what's very important, that all these are somehow based on more cultural than economic, practical factors. So this is a very cultural imagination of Europe, and a very cultural imagination of all these countries and why they should belong to Europe. And it goes, I think, very much against what we have heard from the ambassador, that the enlargement process is a practical issue, it's an economic issue. We should start with economics, we should guarantee that we have efficient state, administrative capacity, a working economy. And I would argue that this is very much, again, a historical legacy of East Central Europe, because while originally ideas that somehow were channeled into the post-Second World War European Union, European integration, were very often based on cultural tropes as well. They were turned towards this more practical after the Second World War. And for the East Central European countries, this phase of reimagining Europe a different way is missing from their history. And it's very important. Or those examples, one can speak of, I saw behind Juraj Marusiak a placard of commemorative year or event for Milan Hoxha. So, for example, Milan Hoxha had an interesting confederation plan. The Austro-Marxists had plans about organizing the Habsburg space. Even to a certain extent, Friedrich Naumann's Mitteleuropa was part of it. So these are not part of the historical memory and the self-imagination, because this is how societies, and this is, for example, why Hungary's example with the Balkans is very fascinating, how these vague notions of medieval Hungarian greatness could come back and inform foreign policy today. So I would say that one of the issues that we should really think about is this, and I think it goes to Spasimir's argument about the tension between the geopolitical logic and the values as well, because we can also associate somehow the culture with values and this economic idea or the idea of starting successful integration from more practical issues with a very different, even to a certain extent, even geopolitical idea. And the second point about the historical reconciliation. So, as I mentioned, within the project I argued that the V4 example rather tells that it would be better to leave out historical issues from the process of enlargement, and I still think that it's really a valid point for the North Macedonian Bulgarian case. Why and very briefly, I made this argument. Within the V4, we can see that there was practically all of the countries had some kind of, two of the countries had some kind of problems with Hungary, and Hungary had problems with all of its neighbors. And it was an explicit or implicit condition of the whole accession process that Hungary should settle these historical issues with all of these countries. And none of these were settled on the model that was implicitly or explicitly offered by the European Union, the Franco-German historical reconciliation. We cannot see any similar process in Hungary. If there was something going on because of historical intervention in the Hungarian-Slovak relation, it stopped. So we don't have common textbooks, we don't have common commemorations, we don't have an idea, don't have youth exchange, nothing is happening between Hungary and its country. And still, what we can see that history doesn't really matter anymore in Hungary's relation with its neighbor, and where societies have some kind of proximity, like in the Slovak-Hungarian relation. It doesn't even matter that historians, politicians still want to keep somehow the idea of some kind of conflictual reading of history at all, where we can see that there is an authoritarian cooperation like in the Hungarian-Serb relationship. Authoritarian governments can easily come to this kind of agreement over certain facts for political benefits at home. But, and this is, I think, a very important point, these are all historical issues in Hungary's relation with its neighbor that are beyond the customary scope of social memory, family memory, the three generations. And in the Western Balkans, we have a very important historical event that is still within the reach of this kind of three generations. It is actually within the reach of the first generation that experienced it, and this is the wars, the Balkan Wars. And it's easy to deal with these historical issues without a historical reconciliation process that happened in the Hungarian relation, if there is not really a social pressure from below anymore to deal with real lived experiences of people. But I don't think that it is given in regarding the Balkan Wars, and this is a matter that is complicating how Europe should approach the whole enlargement. It cannot leave out history, but it's not just the historical reconciliation process that could bring somehow peace of memory regarding these closer, more proximate events, but also to rethink somehow this issue of how Europe can find a balance between this kind of cultural self-positioning and the more practical idea of a community, and also whether Europe would need to change its self-understanding as a cultural community in order to integrate better these kinds of social memories. But this is a matter for a very, very different event. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabor, for your input on the subject. Next, we have Professor Michal Witt. Michal?
Hello, everyone, and it's not morning anymore, so in the course of the discussion or the contribution that has been presented so far, I would like to add 2 points, kind of summarizing what we discussed in Bratislava, what has been said now. If I go back, let's say 2-3 years, I would tend to agree or to push for the idea that the enlargement process should be about these practicalities, about the common market, about these small tangible things that would make the political enlargement inevitable. However, what we see in context of the Russian aggression towards Ukraine, this we are facing the political messages towards Moldova, towards Ukraine, and we see less political messages towards the Western Balkans. And said that from that perspective, and to keep the both credible and the real contribution to the enlargement process, I tend to more and more think that the enlargement process should be contrary to these small practicalities, be again refrained more with the political message. And the political message, I don't see here a conflict between the geopolitical message and the political message. Of course, that the geopolitic element matters, but on the other hand, the enlargement has been always about political priorities of the European Union, not of the European Union, but the key member states, and how they see the future of the European Union, because the European Union, the institutions, of course, fulfill the will and the priority of its member states. This is nothing new. This has not been. This has been in the place for decades, and I'm a little bit confused why suddenly the key role of the political message towards the enlargement should be played by the EU institution, namely by the European Commission, that represents the instruments of the enlargement, not the core, the political message of how the European Union functions. And if we look at the institutional structure of the European Union, the highest and the most important institution is the European Council, which represents the interests and the priorities of its member states, not some untouchable political instrument, namely the European Commission, but the interest of the member states of the European Union. And I think that the way how this message should be channeled should be, of course, taking into consideration the role of the European institutions, European Commission as the engine behind the process of the enlargement, but the enlargement as per se should be a political process which is fulfilled by the small practicalities, driven by interests that are making the connection. So common market, in inviting especially Western Balkan countries in participating in the processes, from foreign policy to the defense the collaboration in defense policy, the internal market, inviting into solving or resolving common challenges of the for the European continent, from security, the social aspects to the various social aspects, and these things are currently handled bilaterally. You know, why not being fair towards the region and saying, yeah, we have common interests, we have common issues, common challenges, include them into the enlargement process as a way how things will get in one package, as you know, the being in the process of the enlargement, because the enlargement, and I think, or I strongly believe that pushing the reconciliation process from the perspective of the European institution as a matter of let's say the independent guardian of the process. Uh, there is a role for moderation. There is a way for smoothening the process, but it's not should be the judge who will say, or that will say, you know, these things are good or bad. The way is to channel the process, not to be the one, not to be the institution that will decide if this is good or this is bad. And I think that there should be also the more clarity in this whole process. What is the task for the European Commission? What is the political message delivered by the European Council? And what are the priorities and the political agendas, let's put it like that, of the individual member states. And good, this leads me to the second point, as this Visegrad legacy in the region, and in the also, you know, discussed through the project. And the best thing that the Visegrad countries, regardless, you know, differentiating interests, is to advocate for, you know, to keeping the political message on the agenda, both in Brussels and in the key, together with the key member states of the European Union, that the agenda will not be treated as a to-do list of the enlargement process, but that will be framed as a, you know, the political message and the political legacy of both Central Europe, as well as what Gabor mentioned, this post Second War imagination of the role of the European Union towards the region. You know, given the time, I would stop here, hoping that it will also spark some reactions.
Just before you give the floor to Dimitar, just a quick clarification for Michal. He was a bit late, right? So maybe, Michal, you missed the intro where I
was listening it.
Okay, so geopolitics is understood as politics, as and the discussion about the attempt of the European Commission to redefine itself as geopolitical and render political everything, from digitalization of market and education to whatnot, is part of its refashioning, redefinition, rewrapping into a more of a political rather than technocratic entity. So we are just opening up the dilemma whether, so take the geopolitical as political. So we're basically opening the dilemma: is it really so, or is the old technocratic inertia continuing there? Unless I was unclear, I just wanted to clarify.
No, just quick response. I think your point was very accurate, because this what you were referring to, it is actually the thing that the task of the European Commission, as you know, creating this common political, social, legal space that the European Union is creating, be above the member states, not within the member states, but above. And enlargement.
Okay, so I need.
So this is exactly the task for the European institutions, to build up these kind of concepts with the practicalities. And I think, sorry for missing it, mentioning this explicitly. This is, I think, exactly the moment where to distinguish the tasks that are the matter of the, let's say, the European identity, citizenship within this framework, and the, let's say, the traditional ways, or let's even put it like, old school tools of, fueling the enlargement process with the political power that is held by the member states. But I think I don't think that there is any conflict, or it's
No, it's
perfect to
not.
say
I
them
was
in a.
just worried that there may be some misunderstanding, but because I do get that. For example, I was part of this founding meeting of the Begruen Europe Institute in June, and I was surprised that even professors, but from the UK, of political studies were like taking geopolitics in the old 20th century conventional sense. And so I was I just wanted to clarify that we simply speak in the same terms. And just one more thing, unless I have raised some misunderstanding. When I pointed out that even the Commission is redefining itself as geopolitical, I did not mean that it overrides the states. And the Council itself, we know where the political power lies. My point was that the attempt seems to be genuine, because they're trying to render political even the most technocratic thing, which is the Commission itself. More of as a symptom of the intention than of the fact. You and I agree about the fact. I was pointing more to the symptom of the intention. Okay, let's not take more time from the others, just to make it clear, because it does raise some misunderstandings occasionally. Okay.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Katerina. Next, we have Professor Dimitar Vacev. Dimitar.
Thank you, Riste. Thank you for inviting me to join this interesting conversation. First, I will mention my general commitment that the enlargement of EU with the Western Balkans is absolutely inescapable in near future. That is why, because as Spasimir mentioned, the geopolitical logics becomes predominant after the war of Kremlin against Ukraine. And the geopolitical logic where the enlargement is absolutely necessary, because for the sake of the security, of EU, becomes predominant in comparison with the logics of value-based politics. Of course, I agree with Michał that the value-based politics defending the principles of liberal democracy and the geopolitical logics should not be read in controversy. They could be read as something naturally shared in their core when we think about the EU. But in fact, I had the wish to focus my presentation, my speech, on one specific and very concrete issue. This is this issue was mentioned by Katerina and Ambassador Gier in the beginning. This is the main obstacle in front of the starting of North Macedonia to start negotiations with the EU. And this is the requirement to inscribe the Bulgarian in their constitution. In fact, I was very surprised following the debates in Macedonia, how this pre-requirement became something framed in bad terms. I was surprised that a great resistance against this requirement raised in Macedonia. Of course, this resistance is led by VMRO, and it is and one of the main speakers of this resistance is Mitskuski. But finally, the thesis that this requirement is a kind of Bulgarian dictate, a foreign dictate on Macedonia, and that it hurts its sovereignty. This thesis becomes a hegemonic one in the Macedonian public space. And I'm very surprised by this fact, and I will try to explain you why. I will start from another point. Many of you know that one of specific interests of mine is the analysis of ideology and propaganda. And I will start mentioning one very famous speech signed by Vladimir Putin, a speech from July 2021, nearly 1 year before the start of the hot war, and then Putin published on Kremlin.ru, on the official site of Kremlin, a paper called For the Union of the Russians and Ukrainians, insisting that the Russian people is a triune people. This is the triune people, three united people, consisting of the Russians, the Belarusians, and of Malarusians or Ukrainians. And all the efforts to divide these triune people are coming from outside, from the West, and so on. This was the starting point in which the Kremlin's propaganda stopped to be disseminated only by some media outlets dependent on Kremlin, but started to be an official language of the Kremlin's officials. From that time, Putin, Peskov, Lavrov, and so on, they repeat the talking points of this propaganda. And this propaganda is based on an imperial project, as an imperial project, insisting that when Ukrainians are part of our Russian nation, they don't have any right for self-determination. I'm stopping with describing the Russian ideology here, and I transfer myself to the Bulgarian discourses. A similar imperial logics we have in Bulgaria in relation to Macedonia. In fact, the central Bulgarian national self-determining discourses from the times of the so-called revival of the Enlightenment, nearly to the end of communism, with some extensions up to now, repeats similar logics. In the Bulgarian national imagination, in the Bulgarian national canon, which should here understand a combination of pieces of literature, history, and so on. The national canon of Bulgaria presupposes that the Bulgarian people is at least two-un, so to say, biyun, because the Macedonians are part of this of its body, and all the attempts for self-determination of the Macedonian people, starting from the mid-19th century at least, are neglected in these discourses. We have here similar imperial logic to the logics of the Russians in relation to the Ukrainians. I'm stopping here with this myth. Fortunately, this founding national myth lost a lot of its power today. It is a founding myth only for the far right Bulgarian political party Visegrad at the moment, and for some national populist marginals in Bulgaria. It is not the founding discourse of the Bulgarian policy and politics at the moment. And I'm returning to the requirement for inscribing Bulgarians as a minority among other minorities in the Macedonian constitution. I'm very curious why the Macedonian public scene, at least the progressive part of it, didn't use this requirement to announce a victory against the Bulgarian imperial myth. Because with this requirement, Bulgaria recognizes that the Macedonians and the Bulgarians are not one and the same thing. That the Macedonians are not part of the Bulgarian people's body. That this is the first recognition, and if you listen the discourses of the recent leader of Visegrad, you hear that Macedonians and Bulgarians are one and the same. The Macedonia is an artificial country without sovereignty and so on. All these bullshits falls down after articulating the simple requirement to inscribe the Bulgarians into the constitution, because this is a clear recognition that the Bulgarians are minority and they don't coincide with the Macedonians. And of course, the second argument is that the level of self-determination has changed its level with this recognition. Now we don't have a united people self-determining itself, but we have a modern idea of self-determination, where the self-determination is a matter depending on the citizens, on the individuals who can self-determine themselves either as Macedonians or as Bulgarians or as Albanians and so on. Finally, I see a good chance in this requirement that is so huge obstacle in front of the start of the negotiations. If we find a way to reframe this requirement into intelligent modern political terms, then we could organize a campaign, a positive campaign, insisting that such a requirement could open space for the self-determination of the small peoples of the small countries. It could be combined with support towards the Ukrainians in the war, and we could reorganize our values in a normal way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dimitar. Lista, we're beginning with plenary discussion, right?
Yeah.
So I can take over the moderation. I just want to respond to Dimitar. I'm as puzzled as you are why our own nationalists and our own patriots in Macedonia are not seizing the opportunity by recognizing the Bulgarian minority, to delineate this nation from the Bulgarian nation, as you say. And in that way, we are winning a huge historical victory, I would say. That would be the first implicit recognition, essentially, of the Bulgarian state of such thing as a Macedonian nation. Nonetheless, the patriots here, the nationalists here, the center right, and our center right, as in the rest of Europe, is moving more toward the more radical right than the center right, is saying no to this. The arguments are various, and they essentially, in response to your being puzzled, asking the question, they just don't make sense, essentially. First, they are made out of principle. No one is allowed to pose any historical conditionalities on us, just like that, vaguely in general. Whereas we are in parallel implementing PRESPA, for example. So there is this contradiction here, which doesn't make sense. That's one of the usual responses. The other response is, what about the Macedonian minority in Bulgaria? Well, step by step, allow Europe and Bulgaria to recognize you as a nation. You're still not implicitly, you're still negated as a nation. And then support, even though you have no right to interfere in foreign affairs, and then support the struggle of the Macedonians and Bulgaria. I mean, you cannot just expect everything at once from a nation that was negated by all of its neighbors until so very recently. So there are all sorts of illogical responses from the supposed patriots plus nationalists, and it so much doesn't make sense. So my guess is when there is something irrational like that, and you cannot find logical explanation for it, there are hidden motives that are not stated openly. My sense and suspicion, based on some recent researches that have been published, is the growing Euroscepticism in this country, and they are just willing to latch on any excuse to not further negotiate. This is my guess. I don't know if it's correct. Okay, I'll give the floor to the ambassador. There are two raised hands there. Czech Republic, I believe, Mr. Ludva. You're muted, Ambassador. Unmute yourself.
Now it's
Okay.
okay. Yeah. Thank you. I would thank you for organizing this this roundtable discussion. It was very fruitful once again to hear all the different point of views. But I would like to come direct to the topic. V4 position, V4 stand towards EU enlargement. It's a natural goal for V4 countries. We need Western Balkan inside Europe more than you need us. And Czech Republic has been a big supporter all the time, even more during the recent EU presidency of European Council. And you have mentioned support for Ukraine. I would say it's complementary. Support for Ukraine, which is a big one from our side, is not contradictory to support for V4 countries, for Western Balkan countries. It's a complementary procedure. It's a new geopolitical situation, giving new impetus and new chance for speedier EU enlargement. And I would like to mention one thing. The best thing is dialogue. Dialogue is solving a lot of issues. And the Czech Republic has been promoting dialogue between North Macedonia and Bulgaria during its presidency. We organized a number of conferences in both sides, in North Macedonia as well in Bulgaria. I mean, it was a Czech embassy here in Macedonia in cooperation with the one in Sofia. And now with cooperation with EU delegation, he will enhance this procedure to further level. It will be a continuation of this dialogue financed by EU funds and with the cooperation of Czech side. And also we continue with our process. This year we will have another series of conferences on this topic, this time financed by International Visegrad Fund. That's all what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yes, we should have noticed that and remarked on that and mentioned that in the intro. The Czech embassy is the proof. Even some initiatives of the Slovak embassy back in the days of the veto are the proof that at least some Visegrad countries here in the country, represented through their embassies, are indeed active and pushing forward in a rather committed way for the region's integration, and especially resolving the dispute with Bulgaria, between Macedonia and Bulgaria. So indeed, you're right. I mean, I did mention it in the intro, but maybe a longer elaboration is more than welcome, and you gave it. So I don't know, someone else to add something to the discussion? Let's see in the chat.
Maybe a view from Embassy of Slovakia in Skopje.
Yeah. Please, Ambassador, go ahead.
Kind of echo. Hear me?
We don't hear any echo. The sound is here. Is good here on our end, at least to me. I don't know about the others. So you can go ahead.
I think I have brought.
Ambassador, we cannot hear you.
Okay, I'm trying again. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Now is good. Yeah.
It doesn't work properly.
We can hear you well at this moment.
Okay, I will try. You know what? I feel very uncomfortable with this computer, but not only that. This doesn't work, sorry.
Yeah, you keep breaking.
Maybe we can ask the ambassador to type the comment or the question in the chat.
Ambassador, can you type the comment in the chat area? Jan Jingel.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody, for interesting comments and discussions. It was great also to be part of the first part in November here in Bratislava, in person, now at least online. Allow me a couple of comments to this discussion. I would like to pick up on what Spasimir said, because it was really very important, and that is the good observation that there is a kind of a lack of internal coordination in V4 countries in terms of Western Balkans and and also the enlargement in general. I think this is a quite natural given the current status of the Visegrad 4 group. Of course, maybe in the past there was much more coordination, but now at the moment this is clearer and more understandable, as each of the Visegrad 4 countries has a different interests towards the Western Balkans. Let's face it. Hungary has quite a huge interest towards the Western Balkans, and they pursue it through their own means, which are not that much aligned with those of Slovakia, Czechia, or Poland. Slovakia is declaring Western Balkans as one of its main foreign policy priorities. For Czechia, maybe more important is the Eastern vector, and for sure for Poland, Eastern vector is much more important. So, kind of a common policy on the EU enlargement toward Western Balkans and common Visegrad group position on the Western Balkan. I don't think it's a kind of possible at the moment. There can be some coordinations, but I don't think that the interests at the moment are aligning. And here I'm getting to second point, which I think Michal made, that the Visegrad 4 group should kind of make more messaging, political messaging in the Brussels about the EU enlargement. Well, I think the exact opposite, to be honest. The less Visegrad group will be talking about EU enlargement, the better, because Visegrad group at the moment is perceived as a problematic among many countries in the West. And if the enlargement has advocates such as Orban or some other leaders which are perceived problematic in Berlin, Paris, or other capitals, this might actually make more problems than solve. So actually, I think that the V4, yes, it is a very nice platform for coordinating our policies within this region when we can agree upon. It is a good platform from the point of view of Visegrad Fund, because Visegrad Fund is apolitical, but at the moment, taking into consideration all the geopolitical consequences and all the geopolitical impacts of Ukraine and sanctions on Russia and approaches towards the EU enlargement, I don't think it's a constructive. In order, V4 is the strongest supporter or strongest promoter, better to say, promoter of the enlargement at the EU. And the last point, about the European Parliament, we mentioned the resolution about enlargement of the Western Balkans by the 2030. However, soon we will have the new elections in this June, and the composition of the European Parliament will be probably quite different. So we will see about the results, what kind of results will be based on the elections in the whole Europe. It is expected that the composition will move more center-right, or will in some of the countries even towards more extreme right. So that will then impact not only the composition of the European Parliament and its positions further on the enlargement, but also the composition of the European Commission. So I just gave a couple of ideas, couple of food for thoughts to start the discussion further. So please, over to you.
Okay, three more raised hands. Just a quick comment on your comments, Jan. Don't get me wrong. I published a huge volume with George Washington University criticizing illiberal democracies in Europe, and Orban was one of the main targets of this criticism. So I am not endorsing Orban when saying that here in Western Balkans, if you point out that Orban and the Visegrad countries are pushing for integration, you will get more support for EU integration from the Eurosceptics because they love Visegrad for more than Western Europe. So in terms of utilitarianism, it could actually work, what Michal is suggesting. I know I sound cynical, but I just wanted to make this remark. Okay, now it's the Ambassador Ludva, then Michal, then Spasimer, then Dimitar.
Thank you. Just a brief comment to what my friend Jan have said, and I agree fully with it. Just to make a small remark to what he mentioned, like division or specific points of Visegrad country towards Western Balkans. For the Czech Republic as well as for Slovakia, traditionally, geographically, Western Balkan is a traditional priority because we are much closer to Western Balkan countries than to Eastern Partnership countries, and also the long tradition. We, of course, give a big support to Ukraine, but it's a political decision. But throughout the history and throughout the recent history of our recent EU membership history, we have been always supporting Western Balkan. It was on the top of our priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Wait, I just mixed up the applications. Then we have Michal, then Spasimir. Michal, unmute yourself.
Sorry, quick comment. Look, as Katarina said, from very utilitarian point of view, even if we don't like someone, we have to talk to. We have to talk to those who we don't like, and if we want to get someone on our side, there has to be some kind of some kind of communication and engagement. So the talking about enlargement, I see it's not about talking in Brussels, but it's getting the right doors to be knocked in, to have the right to people with or an institution with leverage, and to know where and how these key decision makers should be approached and should be communicated, and how the issue should be communicated. And I think this is, and we as from the point of Central Europe, maybe Spasimir has because Poland is wannabe leader of the European Union, at least from the eastern angle. But and I think that this is the thing for Central Europe, that we always think that there is someone that will fix our problem, or that we are not influential enough to know how things are handled. Well, if we want to do this as a political priority, then we have to we have to do more also this thing, and which is building the influence together with our partners from the Western Balkans, not for them, but in the collaboration for the thing that of course is demanding, but if done properly, then the benefits of such a building up network can be very, very, very beneficial, and even better if done in coordination with our partners from Visegrad Group. But again, then it gets the political downstream. But one point from the perspective of Poland, or the collaboration between the Czech Republic and Poland. Let's be honest. Even for Poland, Western Balkans is why Poland should be interested in engagement with Western Balkans in terms of the legacy, the identity, all the historical the narratives. Given the fact that there is Ukraine, Belarus, and this eastern angle, but Poland at least invested money in the process, invested to create the network, organized the follow-up of the Berlin summit in Poznan 4 years ago, which means of course, we can discuss if it is good or bad, how effective, etc., etc. We can discuss about the Polish public administration, how the Western Balkan is handled. But on the other hand, that's exactly the political message that has been sent by Poland, and still it's there, and the connections have been made. And I think this is, if done properly on the networking level, let's say the political level, the achievement can be very, very good. Even not considering what Viktor Orban wants to do in especially towards Serbia or Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I agree with Katerina. This is let's be a utilitarian. We want something. Let's work for it. Just discussing how things are not working, it leads to nowhere.
Okay, Spasimir. Muted, it seems, or the line is breaking. I don't know.
A comment, and the line is breaking because do you hear me now?
Yeah, now it's fine.
Okay. Thank you, Jan, for the comment. I'm happy that the Polish perspective was raised in our discussion. I have to admit that indeed we are still waiting to see what will be the new Polish foreign policy priorities. The political situation is very intense in Poland, and it is going to become.
Okay. There was a delay for a while. We couldn't hear you, but it's okay now. No, we can't hear you. Maybe you can type the comment.
Or switch off the video.
Or switch off the video.
Well, there is this challenge whether listen, I will try my phone. It might be a better connection.
Okay. Should we give the floor in the meantime to Dimitar until you reconnect? Okay. Mitko, let's go with you, and then we give back the floor to Spasimir.
Okay. I just wanted to make something like a final comment. I agree with you, Katerina, that the rise of the Euroscepticism is one of the main threats for EU. It is not just a threat for Macedonia or for Eastern Europe. Let us remind Brexit, of course. And maybe we should redefine our task as in the direction of lobbying for more white propaganda for the EU. We saw behind Ambassador Gear the writing EU issue. Of course, there are some initial steps in the EU for advertising itself, but these steps are only a few. And I think that we are in a situation, in a global situation, where the anti-liberal democratic voices become more and more organized. Of course, they are forced by Kremlin on the one hand, but there are a lot of other players too. So we should self-organize in a counter-offensive, in a communicative, strategic counter-offensive. Thank you.
Well, we started, Dimitar, with our network that is growing with European alternatives. Let's see what we do as organizations. So hopefully we will grow bigger and bigger. Okay, you right now. And Spasimir is back. Okay, you write, and then I give back the floor to Spasimir.
Okay. So I just want only to add to the statements by Jan that what about Visegrad? So currently, in its current state, Visegrad, of course, could be a kind of inspiration for Western Balkans, but I am not sure if just Visegrad group can become the advocate of EU enlargement, of Western Balkans EU enlargement, because of its current situation, because just Viktor Orban is becoming the main symbol of Visegrad group, as Viktor Orban is in fact isolated within the European Union. So he for all EU member states and for many EU actors, it would be just the negative message that the new member states will be the new allies of Orban, new allies of current Hungarian government. So I think also for Macedonia and for other Western Balkan states is crucial to recognize where to pronounce this word Visegrad. If it is appropriate to say it, for example, on the in European institutions, or not, or of course here are in the framework of Central European countries, it is more acceptable. But for example, probably not in the case of Czech Republic, because also Czech politicians openly claim that Visegrad is no more attractive for appropriate regional cooperation frameworks. So this appropriation of different regional cooperation formats to some Visegrad states is also very important. That for Poland is more appropriate to say to speak about Three Seas Initiative, for Hungary about Visegrad cooperation. For Czech Republic, it was long time the Austerlitz 3 formula. We will see how it will work after the recent elections in Slovakia. And sorry, I would like to apologize, but I must leave in a few minutes. So once again, I wish to express my thanks for inviting me to the conference and for inviting me to the project. Goodbye.
Thank you, Juraj, also for being our host in Bratislava, and thank you for the participation here. I will briefly comment, and I'm assuming we will agree here with Michal. In North Macedonia, Hungary or Orban will never be, especially among the Eurosceptics, will never be perceived as the leader of the agenda of EU integration of Western Balkans. The person that is sort of epitomizes all of this and is also very hated is Emmanuel Macron. So the infamous French proposal, the decadent Western Europe wanting liberal and decadent wanted to suck us into their degraded values, etc., etc. All of that is the image primarily that they are fighting against, the image in front of their supposed opponent is that of Western Europe, and primarily Macron. So they're simply just surprised when they see that, oh, Hungary also supports EU integration. So maybe there is a possibility for parties across different ideological spectrum or area of different political parties in the parliament to finally grasp that EU integration is a bit more than ideologies, clashes of ideologies, and values elevated on this level of ideologies. For example, am I pro-LGBT and a feminist or not? And that there are certain more rudimentary European values and interests that somehow bring together both Macron and Orban. I agree with Jan, with completely different motivations there, but they overlap. So this is interesting to note. We do not need to root for any of the sides, but it's important to note this situation. Okay, sorry to keep you Spasimer, it was your turn.
Thank you, Katya. I will not turn on my camera.
Okay.
Me now well. So I just wanted to finish my remark. Actually, you know, since the whole effort of our project is to produce certain recommendations, maybe another one that we can produce for the V4 is that actually that can become another field for shared coordination among the countries. But what is most important in the context of all your arguments that appeared is that we should recommend a kind of a depoliticization of this is the one that works best when it comes to the cooperation. Do you hear me?
With some problems, but yes.
Okay. Last but like 15 years ago, reason why it needs to be involved, but the current challenge for the Polish engagement in the Western Balkans is our government change, because it is not clear so far. We're waiting for the let's say new framework of the Polish foreign policy priorities, and the concern is that the Western Balkans can become a collateral damage of the internal political infighting between law and justice and the civic platform. And we don't know what will be the future of the 3Cs initiative, which is this, I would say, tangible dimension of the Polish views towards the region. And on that note, I will stop for two reasons. The connection is not very good, and also I know the time is starting to pressure us. Thank you very much, and thank you, Katya, for putting all this together with Riste.
Thanks, Spasimer. Mitko?
I just want to thank you for inviting me and for this very good discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dimitar. Okay, Juraj? He left?
I think that is the old order.
He said he would leave, but his hand is raised, so I guess that's it, huh? We have no further comments. Can we wrap up for today? Okay. Yeah, it's been long, 2 hours and a half. A great discussion, I would say. We have recorded all of it. I'm presuming, I hope, Rista, you didn't forget to hit the button. And and we will share the recording with all of you. Okay, thank you all very much for this, you know, like excellent level of discussion and interventions. Thank you all for being partners in this project. You're all brilliant minds, and without you, it wouldn't have been, you know, what it has been in the past 2 years. I consider the two projects as continuation of, you know, the same initiative essentially. So thank you all for everything and for the excellent quality of papers. I mean, I couldn't be more pleased with what we have done in the past years. So again, thanks a lot and keep in touch. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.